Welcome, everybody. Today, we've got a very exciting guest, Seth Godin.
Well, I guess you could call me excited because it's great to talk to you, and I appreciate you taking the time. So thanks.
Awesome. Thank you. Seth likely needs no introduction, but if you are not familiar with Seth, he's an author, an entrepreneur, and most of all, a teacher. He has 19 worldwide bestsellers, including The Purple Cow and Tribes. Soon to be 20, by my guess, with his new book, The Practice, that's coming out on November 3rd, I believe. Seth is also a Marketing Hall of Fame member, and perhaps equally as impressively, he's a daily blogger for the last 10 years. Seth, I'd love to learn how you decided to do that and why, and what it was like 10 years ago when you first made that choice.
Okay, so daily blogging is something that almost everyone should do, even if you don't do it under your own name, even if you don't have a business reason to do it. The idea that tomorrow you need to say something fairly permanent for anyone who wants to find it makes your life better. It helps you notice things. It lets you put a stake in the ground. I'm really glad I did it. I started blogging 25 years ago before they were called blogs, and have written thousands and thousands and thousands of blogs. What I was doing was semi-erratic. Some days I do 3 or 4 posts, some days I'd skip. And then I think it was a little bit more than 10 years ago, I took a deep breath and I said, this should be a practice. This should be something that I don't have a discussion with myself about whether or not I'm going to do it. It is simply something that I do. And that's why I like the idea of a daily blog, why I think most people should have one. We brush our teeth every day. We take a shower every day. You should blog every day.
So I'm curious because that was, for someone who is not a daily blogger, that feels like a huge commitment. And I think a lot of people might feel the same way. Why do you focus on daily rather than, weekly or monthly to start off with, at least?
What I'm trying to do, and I do this a lot in the book, is destroy perfectionism. Perfectionism is a trap. Perfectionism has nothing to do with perfect. Perfectionism has nothing to do with quality. Perfectionism is simply a place to hide. And so if you say, I'm going to blog every month, you're saying, well, every month I have to put something out there that is justified by the fact that I did it, that I waited a whole month to do it. Whereas a daily blog, you simply blog. And you know that half of them are going to be below average. And you know that you're going to do 365 of them. And you know that tomorrow's could be even better than today's. It is a commitment, but it is not a risk. And it's okay if your daily blog posts don't say very much. I just am encouraging people to say, shipping the work is part of our craft. And if you get the chance to ship the work in this low risk way, why wouldn't you take it?
I think back now, it's hard to think. It's sometimes hard to think, yeah, I'm going to do that moving forward. But it's really easy to look back and say, man, if I would have just started 5 years ago or even 1 year ago, how much more experienced would I be now? How much more confident would I be? How much more would I've learned from my audience and honed that down? And so I got to say, that outlook has made me feel like I've lost a lot of time and opportunity. But no better timed than to start now, I suppose.
Exactly. And I didn't blog until I was 35 years old. So I wasted 35 years. So we're even.
I think a great way to think about your book is contained in the last line, which says, the magic is that there's no magic. Could you care to elaborate on what you mean by that?
We would like to believe that there is magic in many elements of our life because then it lets us off the hook. If you don't feel motivated, if you don't feel like it, if you say, well, the magic didn't show up today. And struggling salespeople wait for the magic. Writers who pretend they have writer's block wait for the magic. Programmers who are stuck with a bug wait for the magic. There's no magic. No one in the universe is paying attention to you. There aren't angels or people with lightning bolts or the muse just watching you carefully and then throwing down little breadcrumbs. You're all you got. And so as soon as you acknowledge that this is a skill, not a talent, it puts you on the hook because you can learn to do it better. You can bring more rigor to it. You can bring more generosity to it. It's on you. You have a practice. No one wants to go to a doctor who says, "Oh yeah, they died. It must have just been, the heavens." You want to go to a doctor who says, "I know why they died, and that it's not going to happen to my next patient." They get better at it, and that's our craft: is to lean into the work and to bring a practice to it.
There was another quote from the book that I think really sums that up. As you said, creativity is an action, not a feeling, and that getting into the flow or the zone, as I tend to call it, is a side effect of this process and the practice that you go through, rather than something that finds you and strikes you with a bolt of lightning and now you've got it. And again, that was something that's just a really empowering way to think about it, because I think you do look at, it's easy to look at other people and say, okay, he's just super talented. He's, this guy just has it, like even some people even claim that that's how it works for them. But, perhaps that's, they're fooling themselves. I think, as you said in the book, around Bob Dylan, I think he said somewhere to the effect that the songs just come to him and whatever. And you're like, I think he called bullshit on him, which I thought was pretty funny.
I did, and if Bob wants to give me a ring, I'll happily argue with him about it.
I'm sure. You had a couple analogies in the book that I thought were pretty helpful. One of them was about a story you told about fly fishing without a hook. And the point was, and I think it ties into not getting caught up in the outcome, and just focusing on the process. Why is that so important? And why are you so deliberate about doing things that way?
Okay, so I did go fly fishing for the first time. Lessons in Wyoming, beautiful, beautiful day with good friends, and I got the guide to find in his kit a fly that had no hook on it. So everybody else, because there was social pressure and because they were type A people, was willing the fish to bite the hook. Now here's this fish with a 1,000,000-year-old brain, and people are trying to use telepathy to get the fish to bite the hook. And as a result, every action they took, all of their casting, they weren't present because it was all about the outcome. How do I get this fish to do this thing I want? I had no chance of catching a fish because I had no hook. And so I was there in the day, casting, breathing, being present. And within an hour, my casting was better than anybody else's because I wasn't trying to get to the outcome. I was simply doing the work, doing the cast. And my hunch is that if later on I had added a hook, I probably would have done better than most because I was in that mode of how do I do this well, not how do I measure whether I get lucky or not.
And I guess that by that point, the next day, if you actually did want to go catch a fish, you'd be much better prepared because you'd focus on, I think you also use an analogy of juggling without catching. Just focus on that, and don't focus on your reviews. Don't read your reviews. Don't even think about that, at least for a while, and just create. Now, how do you reconcile that with the same idea of, you also talk about knowing what's good and knowing how to know what's good. I would think you get that from your feedback, right? So are you saying that there's a time, like for the first while, don't focus on that and then start to let some of those ideas in to inform yourself about what your audience needs, or how should you go about that?
Okay. So good is a tricky term. Good is based on the smallest viable audience. You're not able to make something for senior citizens in Sweden and young kids in Mexico. Different languages, different goals, different views. Who's it for? We got to be really clear before we even start to think about what good means. Number 2 is understanding genre. What does this rhyme with? It is possible that you will make a podcast like no one has ever heard before, or write a novel that fits into a section of the bookstore that doesn't even exist. But that's very unlikely. It's more likely you will have something that we know what it is before we try it. And once you've claimed those 2 things, my audience and my genre, then if you've done the reading, if you have domain knowledge, you might be able to tell if it's good or not. And even if you can't tell, it's not that hard to test if other people want to talk about it, if other people want to spread the word. And so this is part of the magic of why anyone would sign up for the difficult, dangerous work of being a stand-up comic. No props, no shortcuts. You're standing in front of 50 people, and maybe they laugh. And if they laugh, it's better than if they don't, right? And if after the show they tell other people, now you have a career. So it doesn't matter if you think it's funny. If they don't, you're not going to work. It doesn't matter if you don't think it's funny. If they do, you have a craft. And so I think too often we censor ourselves and say this isn't good with no evidence. And other times we get trapped because we are sure it's good, but we have no evidence.
Yeah, definitely. That's a tough line to walk for sure. On that the story about the stand up, I think in your book you were talking about that in context of authenticity, and you say authenticity is a trap. And this is certainly a struggle I've had for myself with trying to find the voice for the podcast. Like, what can I actually say and do that's authentic as well? Why is that a trap?
Oh, it's totally a trap. The last time it was useful to be authentic is when we were 2 years old. 2-year-olds say whatever comes to mind. They do whatever they want. Right after that, we start to say, what will get me the result I seek? Will asking nicely get me something even though I don't feel like asking nicely? Okay, I'll ask nicely. Was it authentic that I asked nicely instead of just punching you in the stomach? No, it wasn't authentic, but it worked because you needed me to ask nicely for you to say yes. And if we go to a concert, an Elvis Costello concert or whatever, we don't want Elvis to show up as however he's feeling tonight. We want the best version of him, the best available version. We want the all-star version of Elvis Costello. That's what we paid for. In fact, that's true for every single interaction we have. We don't want authenticity. We want consistency. And the reason it's work and not your hobby is you don't just do it when you feel like it. You do it because, like my blog, there'll be a new one tomorrow. Not because I feel like it, but because it's tomorrow. And acting as if makes a huge difference in your practice.
So is it more or less fake it till you make it? Can you rephrase that way, or do you see them as being different?
Well, so fake it has all sorts of pejoratives associated with it. And I think we don't want to manipulate people. Fake implies that if they discovered something, they would be upset with you. So if you buy a fake painting, you want your money back, right? On the other hand, if they discover what you know, not only aren't they upset that Elvis gave the concert of his lifetime, even though he was having a horrible day, they're proud of him for putting in the effort, right? And so I think what it means, instead of fake it till you make it, how about serve people until it works? Because that's what we're here to do. We're here to make a change happen. And we do that by serving other people, even though it might not feel like what we feel like in this particular moment.
I estimate that there's probably millions of podcast episodes that have never seen the light of day that have been recorded, partially just because people realize how hard podcasting is technically, which is what we're trying to help with, is get that time. But also people run into this, and I've also experienced this side of it, the second guessing. You jump in to edit your podcast and then you're like, oh, did I, sometimes it's even hard to listen to yourself once, much less like edit it into a completed product. How do you, is that something that you feel, is that self-consciousness around just, did I make myself look stupid here? Do I want to share this?
If you don't feel that, if you don't feel like an imposter, you're not trying hard enough. And so I feel it all the time if I'm doing my work. It's easy for me to coast because I've been at this for 40 years. But if I'm doing my work, I feel like an imposter because I'm doing something that might not work, because I'm pushing myself forward into the unknown. And yeah, hearing your voice for the first time or the 10th time, that's hard. The good news is it's not that hard to outsource the editing if you want to do that, but you simply must ship the work. If you don't ship the work, it's not work. It's your hobby. And I love hobbies. You should have a hobby, but don't confuse the two. What it means to make art is to show up for people who need you to make a change that's generous.
Do you have any tips for people that are looking at that trying to jump off the ledge there to find the confidence to just overcome the gravity of that choice? Because I know you're a writer. You're 20 best-selling books. It's gotten easier for you by now, I'm sure. What about back when you very first started? Were you scared of these things, or was it like, oh, I'll just try this and see how it goes?
Well, I love that question because I can deconstruct some of the things. You said, do I have any tips for helping people find the confidence to jump off the ledge? And there are three clauses in that sentence, and I'm trying to undermine all three. So, number one, tips aren't helpful. What you need is a destination, a compass, a process, a practice. You'll find plenty of tips. The internet is filled with tips. Number two, confidence. Confidence is a trap. Confidence implies that you need to be sure something is going to work before you do it. And we got brainwashed into that by school because school pushed us to believe that it's only worth doing if it's going to be on the test. It's only worth doing if we're going to win. And so, you pass by the local high school and they have the big sign out front about the trophy they won, not about what their students learned or how they participated or what they shared or how they leaned into the opportunity, because we live in a trophy culture. And nothing I have ever done have I ever done for the first time with confidence. Not ride a bike, not write a blog post, not write a book. How can you have confidence? It's the first time. And so we don't seek confidence. And the last one about jumping off a ledge, it's more like stepping over a pebble, because tomorrow you're going to do a whole bunch of things. And some of those things you've never done before, but they don't feel fraught. They don't feel overwhelming. And if you treat the thing you're doing like, oh no, this is my one and only wedding day, it's this special day, then you add this whole level of drama to it that actually undermines why you did it in the first place. And it seems to me that part of our practice is to commit to showing up, even though it might not work, because that's where the juice is.
Yeah, no, definitely. I've read the book, and one of the examples you give, like you mentioned, is this riding a bike. And it's funny because it's almost one of the most, like, it's not a new example, right? Learning to ride a bike. But the way that you said it and the way that you put it in the book was, would you expect to be able to learn how to ride a bike without falling? And I think that really clicked for me, as I think that really is the approach a lot of people take when they're wanting to start creating content or creativity in a lot of different ways. Is it seems so ridiculous when you think about it as a bike, but we don't necessarily see how ridiculous it is in other contexts. So that was really valuable. And I think that was one of the things I really liked about the book, is you prop up all these reasons why you may not think you can be creative. And then you say, that's ridiculous, that's stupid, that's nonsense, forget about that, and just go and do it. And very, very empowering, very empowering. So it was very timely for me.
Well, thank you. Let me ask you a question about this process. Zencastr is the gold standard for recording audio conversations for podcasts and things like this. It is hard for me to imagine the quality being better. How long after you started programming Zencastr was that true?
It was years, really.
Exactly. So if you had started on the first day and said, I'm not going to program Zencastr unless it's going to work by tomorrow, we wouldn't have Zencastr. And it's also worth noting that there are perhaps 100,000 people who know how to program almost as well as you, and none of those 100,000 people built Zencastr. You did, right? Well, what's the difference? The difference isn't that you have programming gifts compared to the normal programmer. It's that you decided. You showed up and you showed up and you showed up, fell off the bike, did it again, and then we have Zencastr. And people look at that and say, wow, you got really whatever, lucky, gifted, talented, whatever it is. But no, it actually, now that we know it can be done, someone could do it in much less time than it took you. But first, the hard part was knowing it could be done. And that is the practice, is doing work that other people don't think can be done, that's human, that might not work, that helps other people. And so seeing what you built, I look at that and say, yes, that's exactly what we're talking about.
Nice, thank you. What's funny is when I started building Zencastr, it actually couldn't be built. I just was too ignorant to know that, and it became possible as I was working on it. And that's part of the reason why it took a while to get out of our initial. We ran it for it was just me at the time. It was a year and a half in the original beta before I was ready to actually flip on the paid plans and do all that. And there was certainly an amount of luck in there as well, which is something that you talk about in your book as well. Is you've got this process and this roadmap for how to be creative, but it doesn't guarantee success. It just gives you the best chances at actually finding the success. One question I have for you, and this is maybe more for myself, I think your book is really valuable for a lot of people who are starting podcasts, but there's also people who already have an audience of some sort. What would your advice be to someone who has an audience? Because I think you say start now when nobody cares what you're doing and what you're saying, and then it doesn't matter what you do, and then you can build the confidence as you go. How do you jump right in when you've already got a platform?
Platform and audience are tricky phrases, right? That the way we make a difference, the way we do our art, is by finding the smallest viable audience. What's the smallest group of people we can make an impact with, and obsessing about them? So let's say you're a stand-up comic and you get a chance to be on Conan, or you get a chance to be on Jimmy Kimmel. The question is, should you show up with an act that will mildly amuse everyone, or should you show up with your act, which will completely connect with and overwhelm 10% of the people who watch the show? And I think we can see, if we just look at the media, you always come out ahead if you amaze 10% of the people, not mildly please 100%. Ketchup is not the goal. Like, Heinz got ketchup, congratulations, but ketchup isn't growing. Ketchup isn't important. No one cares really about ketchup. But if you can figure out how to be Dave's Insanity hot sauce that only 1% of the people are willing to cross the street for, you can do great. And so, yes, there are a bunch of people who listen to your podcast partly because they found you through a piece of software they love. But you need to make the podcast you want, and the people who get the joke will stay, and the ones who leave, it's okay. And if you're not thinking that way, if you're saying, how do I get the most famous people I can and come up with something for everyone, your podcast isn't going to matter, and it's not going to be worth making.
No, I 100% agree. I've had a couple of failed attempts previously of making a consistent podcast around Zencastr, and I think I think the challenge that I hit and the avenue that I took and the challenge I hit was that I was like not making a podcast necessarily that I wanted to make, but that my creators would want to hear. And so I started doing podcasts about podcasting tips and tricks and, technique and microphones and this and that. And then after about, 7-10 episodes, I was like, how many more of these can I act interested in? I mean, I'm not uninterested in that stuff, but you can only talk about it so long before you're like, okay, what else is next? And I think I kind of pushed that to the side, and I was like, I need to figure out what I really want to do this about and find my voice and make something around that. I think the really next best thing I can be doing with my time is just creating great content and trying to, I think help show people what you can do with a podcast, not how to podcast, but what it can do for you, I suppose, and how you can learn through it. And one of the great things, the things that always kind of drags me back into it, is it's such an awesome way to get an amazing person to sit down with you and have a conversation. That's, what I'm doing right now.
Podcasts are a beautiful way to put a stake in the ground, to have conversations with people you want to talk to find an interesting place to be. So I'm glad you're doing it. I want to talk from some of the ideas from This Is Marketing, which is the book before this one, that I think are relevant to you and to many of the people who are listening here, which is that the single most important cultural tactic, effect, impact, lever of my lifetime is the network effect. That the network effect has changed the culture more than anything in human history. And the network effect is super simple. It says, if this works better when other people do it too, it will grow. If me talking about this, whatever this is, makes my life better, I will talk about it. Those are two sort of simple statements, but they inform so many elements. So the simplest example, which was in a book I wrote 20 years ago, there was a restaurant in New York City called Carmine's. They sell Italian food, and it was super popular. And they had two principles that enabled that. The first one is you couldn't get a reservation for fewer than 6 people, which meant that if you wanted to go, you had to get 5 other people to go, which meant it was in your interest to tell them about it because otherwise you wouldn't be able to go. And the second piece was they served dramatically more food than you can eat with a lot of garlic in it. So back in the day when people went to offices, when you went to work the day after going to Carmine's, everyone went, "What did you have for dinner last night?" And then you could tell a whole story about this place you went. And so the idea would spread. And so Carmine's, with 2 or 3 locations, was filled every single night for decades. They made millions and millions of dollars because they had the network effect. They didn't say, "Come here because the food is better." They said, "This is a party and parties spread." So if I look at a business like Zencastr, Zencastr is going to grow because people who use it never use it by themselves, ever. Zencastr only works if you're talking to someone else. And so the act of using Zencastr is about introducing Zencastr to someone else. Or if there's a podcaster listening right now, it's one thing to make a podcaster that people go, "Oh, thanks," and another to make a podcaster that people want to talk about. And that's what Serial was and why it was such a hit, because you just felt like you had to talk about it. And so when we put those pieces together, the way we build something to grow is we build something worth talking about, not because it's good for us to talk about it, but it's good for the people who consumed it to talk about it.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. And I've kind of learned that lesson firsthand, perhaps unwittingly. I didn't realize for a long time how to attribute the growth that Zencastr was having. Just with it's been all word of mouth marketing, and we don't do any paid ads or anything like that. And it's just kept growing at a good clip. And it took me a while to figure out, oh, it's this guest to host conversion. Like, people come on, every host brings on 1 or 2 other people. Those people enjoy it. Then they want to have everybody's got an idea for a podcast, and then they sign up as well. And so, yeah, we've greatly benefited from that, and finding ways to actually intentionally work that into whatever you're doing is going to be hugely beneficial. I really enjoyed the book. I really enjoyed the conversation. I can't wait to, further apply a lot of these ideas and, really just get over, I think it's really helping me get over just some of the useless fears that I've had around just taking that step to be better at shipping creative work. So thank you, Seth. Where can people find you online and learn more?
The book is at trustyourself.com. You can read my blog posts for free at seths.blog, SETHS.blog, or just search for my name. And the workshops that Akimbo runs, is an organization I started but don't run anymore, is at akimbo.com, AKIMBO.com.
Great. Do check it out. You can pre-order the practice. It's going to be available November 3rd. I've got my copy ordered, and I know it'll help you guys out as well. Thanks again for being on the show, Seth.
Thank you. A pleasure. And keep making magic with your coding and your team. I, for one, am glad you're doing it.
Thank you. We will.